What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. We are brought to you by Sticks.com. I am Emma Lingen. I am joined by Andrew McInnes. He's a little sad right now because the Habs lost, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. We are, of course, coming at you live to talk about round one, game two between the Washington Capitals and Montreal Canadiens. The Capitals took the game 3-1. They now lead the series 2-0. So wherever you're watching us on YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the hockey news platforms, we encourage you to send us your questions and your comments, your rants, your hopes and dreams and thoughts about the Caps and the Habs, especially if they're about the Habs. Andrew, I'm sure would love to commiserate with you. But we also have game 3 between the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche. Tonight, we've also got Edmonton Oilers at LA Kings, game 2. So we'll talk a little bit about those as well at the end here. But before we get into all of that, we do want to remind you that the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live is brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks? You can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com. That's Stix.com. Head there now and gear up. All right, Andrew, we've got to talk about it. Are you ready? Are you hydrated? Are you ready to go?
I'm as ready as we're going to be. Good to see you, Emma.
It's great to see you. I wish it was under better circumstances for you. Of course, obviously with the Canadiens falling 3-1 to the Washington Capitals, Montreal overcame a multi-goal third period deficit in game 1. So we dared to have hope that maybe they could do it again in game 2. Unfortunately, they did not. So just kind of want to get your overall thoughts on the performance. We talked a little bit about this before the show on how you feel the game went versus how the final score said that it went.
That's exactly it. When you look at the final score and I see 3-1, we include the empty netter. We look at game 1, 3-2 with overtime included. If I told you that, but you didn't actually watch the games, you'd be like, wow, I mean, yeah, they're down 2-0, but they competed. They were right there. But if you watch the games, if you started to sink in your couch lower and lower and lower and lower like I did, then you actually watched the game, because the third period was the best period for the Canadiens in both games. Maybe the first few minutes was actually promising. The Canadiens, one thing I noticed from this game compared to game 1, being the youngest team to ever crack the postseason, they didn't look as nervous. They did not look as nervous. They looked very, I would say, calm. They kind of definitely, I think this was probably something they planned going into the game. Any moment they went behind the net, they regrouped, they got a shift change, they relaxed. But one thing I didn't like was that once they got that lead, and it was so crucial to get a lead, it's almost like that defensive mindset, the protect your own end mindset, that defensive awareness went away. It's like, we got the lead. Now let's just play pond hockey out there. And, there's so many things to look at, but one thing I'll start with is Samuel Montembeault. I know that there was a lot of people that said this guy is the third guy for the Four Nations, when you've got Thompson, who's of course on the opposition. You've got, Vegas goaltenders. You got this guy, you've got that guy. Well, Montembeault, without him, that game is 5-1 after the second period. So Montembeault deserves his respect. And the second guy I'm going to mention, this time negatively, is Patrik Laine, because this was a guy that was picked up by the Montreal Canadiens in the offseason, missed the first 25 games of the regular season, comes back, still becomes a 20-goal scorer, most of those, of course, being on the power play. What happens tonight, Emma? He gets benched in the third period by Martin St. Louis. So people were saying last game, well, Demidov and Newhook, those guys didn't do much. They were playing on the same line as Patrik Laine. So when you don't have a second line and your third line is your second best line and your fourth line is better than your second line, it's a real problem. But I have to say, I think these guys definitely got up for the moment a lot more, but it was the small things that really frustrated me out of this game. And the last thing I'll say is that people often talk about Lane Hutson, who had 2 points in the game 1, but also was on the ice for the goal for Ovechkin. I think that the older defensemen like David Savard, who claimed he's going to be retiring after this season, you can see it. I mean, after the second period, I think the guy had like 6.5 minutes of ice time, and a minute and a half of that ice time was on the PK. It's frustrating because right now the younger players are kind of being the better players for this Canadians team, minus Gallagher and Anderson. So that's my rant. When your guy on your team makes the most money, like Patrick Laine, gets benched in the third period, it's not really a good sign.
It's interesting you bring that up about Line A. I think that was sort of a concern, or maybe not even a concern, more of an observation, I think, that a lot of people had when they did get Line A during the offseason, that he's kind of a one-dimensional player. And if you shut down that one dimension, like, he's supposed to be really good on the power play. Where has he been on the power play in this series, especially? So if you can shut down that one dimension, the novelty kind of wears off, and he really isn't that big of an impact player for this team. And you mentioned the depth of, or maybe lack thereof, in Montreal. I mean, we did finally see some depth scoring from the Canadians. Christian Dvorak scored their first goal of the series that did not come from the top line, the Nick Suzuki line. Again, unfortunately, that would be the only goal that they scored in game 2 against Washington. So how important is it? I mean, you've alluded to this already, but I think, how important is it going to be for these guys to try to find scoring elsewhere in the lineup? Because it's pretty easy. Again, if your top line is doing all of your scoring, well, then the other team is studying you. They know that they shut down that line, then they've got your number. And so now, how much pressure is on the rest of these guys to try and step up and provide some depth scoring?
Well, going into this series, and as someone that follows the Canadians as close as I do, one thing I always say about them that I can really respect is that every player on the team, Emma, knows their role, right? They know who they are and what they are. And that's one thing I can always respect about the Canadians, is that this player on the fourth line doesn't think he's a first liner. And I know some teams kind of have that issue. Like a third line guy is trying to steal a second liner's job, or a second liner is trying to steal a first liner's job. But the issue right now is that Gallagher and Anderson have been two of the best offensive players on the team. And that's a problem. That is the issue, because those players are supposed to be playing probably in their own end a lot more. Dvorak is a guy that's going to be out there for a lot of defensive zone draws, playing in his own end. Jake Evans playing in his own end. But because of the physicality level, because of the type of game they're playing in, the guys that are used to physical hockey, the guys that are good at playing that type of brand of hockey, they're actually the ones creating the offense. So it's tough because you see guys like Newhook and then 19-year-old Demidov caught in their own end quite often, and then those guys can't. And not to mention, even though this guy hasn't played in a long time, Kirby Dach is currently supposed to be the second line center, and the guy pretty much got injured for a full season back-to-back years. So clearly the general manager and the Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton have both said that, a second line center is a key for the offseason, but we can't go to the offseason right now. Here we are right now. So we need Newhook and need that second line to do really well. So that's certainly an issue. And the thing is do you really juggle the lineup very much? When do you do it? And the question below, should Canadians consider playing Arbor Jack Guy? That was a big debate from media, fans, and just people that follow hockey right now in the playoffs. And I think that the more I had time to think about it, the more I realized that St. Louis was right. They lost 3-2 in overtime. It wasn't the best game. They rallied in the third period, only a 1-goal loss. And would Jack Guy's physicality and assertiveness have made that much of a difference? And I think now it's more about a spark. Your team is down 2-0 in the series. Do you put somebody else in at forward? Do you put somebody else in at defense? Do you juggle the lines? You don't want to hit that big red panic button, but at the end of the day, the spark needs to take place. There's going to be a spark from the Bell Center, from that home crowd, but you need more of a spark from changing things up. From your perspective, watching the game, did you see the physicality be as bothersome in game 2 as it was in game 1? It definitely didn't seem to bother the Canadians as much as it did in game 1, but I still see, Caulfield more passionate and animated than I've seen him really in years since being on this team. any missed call, this team is kind of getting a little bit too excited about on the bench. And in the playoffs, you're just not going to get those calls always.
Yeah, it definitely seemed to me in game 1 of this series, Andrew, the physicality was overwhelming, or it seemed to be overwhelming for the Canadiens. I mean, they looked like a team that had not been to the playoffs before, and it was very obvious. And I think that, of course they're younger, they've got speed, and they have things that Washington doesn't have, but then Washington has the size and the physicality that does, it's not everything, but it is a big factor, especially in going on a deep playoff run. So I think that, you look at game 2, it didn't seem like it was as much of an issue for Montreal. They seemed a little bit more prepared. They didn't seem like they were getting ragdolled out there the way that maybe they were in game 1. But yet it's still, the imbalance was still very clear to me. It seemed, looking at especially the first 2 periods, Montreal only had 12 shots through the first 2 periods. That's not going to cut it against really anyone, but especially a large physical team like the Washington Capitals. Now, they may not have been getting as physical and really just bullying them around the ice as much as they were in game 1. But overall, Andrew, do you think their style of play in Washington, and just the size and the intimidation factor is forcing the Canadiens out to the perimeter a little bit too much? Because if you even look at that one goal that they did have, Dvorak's goal, it was a rebound. It was when they got to the net. Like, how important is it for them to be able to sort of penetrate and win those battles, or even engage in those battles in the first place? Because if there wasn't as much physicality in game 2, it almost looked like maybe because the Canadiens were a little scared. They were like, "Oh, okay. Like I know my place. Let me step back here." So how was that evident to you, and how do you think that they overcome that, or can they overcome that?
The decision making, the time you have, it's impeccable at how much different it is than game 82, game 74, game 28 of the regular season, whatever it is. It just changes, and there's no open ice hockey anymore. And when you do get that split second of open ice opportunity, you have to bury it. When you have that breakaway chance that Anderson had, when you have a certain shot by the side of the net that Evans hit the post on, those are chances that you get once, twice a game that you have to be able to bury. But I couldn't agree more with what you said there. There's so much play along the boards. And this is what I'm saying here, is that despite the score being close, something that I, as a supporter, can feel good about at least, the fact is that that's the Washington Capitals game. They play hard. They play physical. They play well along the boards. They're really good at puck retrieval. And so people are saying to me, and I know they're just trying to stir me up, they're saying, well, I haven't seen Demidov. He's been an absolute ghost. Well, he's a 19-year-old that's played 2 regular season games. He just played a full playoffs over in Russia and a full season in Russia in the KHL. And the problem is he's not going to be a guy that dumps the puck in, goes in, chases it, hits somebody. He's going to have to get the puck in open ice. So that's one thing that is kind of difficult. And then one thing I'm going to throw in is that I want to see more shots from the point. You talk about that goal Dvorak scored. It's almost like Dvorak and Anderson scored it together. They were one person. Their sticks were aligned together. And the shots from the point are going to have to create that. And now one problem I have with a player like Mike Matheson, and I promise you, I'm not the only person that has this, is the guy is almost like his pucks are attracted to hitting shin pads when they leave his blade. Like he shoots into shin pads, he shoots into blockers. You need to get pucks through. And so on the power play, if you notice, it was Hudson to Suzuki, Suzuki back to Hudson, Hudson over to Line back to Hudson. And what's missing on that power play? A shot from the point. And obviously Hudson is so skilled. They're 0 for 2 on the power play. He has some wrist shots. He has some nice slap shot, but he doesn't have that overpowering bomb. And you think about Shea Weber from that 2021 series. You think about PK Subban from back in the day, that point, huge slap shot from the point, and they don't have that. So they have Hudson's creativity. And so the one thing, and I hate to go back to Laine, and this last thing I'll say about him is, if he's only a power play guy, why was he so hesitant to shoot the puck on the power play?
Well, I love the Shea Weber shout out. The clapper heard round the world for sure. I think that it's interesting what you bring up about the power play, and I'll circle back to that in a second. But where I thought, and I'm curious what you think of this, is that it seemed to me that the game was either won or lost, depending on whose perspective you're looking at in the neutral zone. I
Mm.
mean, the Canadians absolutely did nothing. They disappeared in the neutral zone. It was like the puck was going straight from the Caps defensemen to their forwards in the other end. And it was just, there was no sort of interception. There was no, they weren't really making it hard for them. The Canadians had 19 giveaways. And I think that is part of it too. But on the power play, as you mentioned, I almost wonder a little bit of, and of course, Lane Hudson, we know, extremely skilled. And, it's a lot to ask of a young rookie to, be the guy who brings the puck up the ice and quarterback a power play unit in the playoffs, no less. But I think that some of his decision making, like, yes, I am all for ragging on Patrick Laine and saying
Mhm.
why is he so hesitant to shoot the puck, but there were a couple moments I felt like where Hudson had the open shot lane to Laine and didn't pass it to him. He passed it somewhere else, and it was kind of like, ooh, are we starting to remember? Is this our reminder that Lane Hudson actually is, he's not superhuman? He's a rookie and he's flawed. And maybe he doesn't have, while he might be poised and skilled for his age, he still is not the, skilled veteran power play quarterback that, people have come to think that he is.
He is young. He is young. I mean, not only is he probably going to win the Calder unless Wolf wins it. He was up there in the top rankings of all defensemen, let alone young defensemen. But to your point, it's the playoffs and the time that you have for the head fakes that he loves to do, for those little stick moves that he loves to do. The time's not there for it. And it's the same thing I said about Demidov, and Demidov just arrived in North America. You don't have any time. And so when you talk about a guy like this, it kind of puts pressure on a guy like Matheson, who's wearing an A on his chest. He's a leader on this team. And again, I mentioned David Savard, the two leaders who both have a dash next to their name after tonight, to put more pressure on them. Because do we sit back and say, well, he's a rookie, we give him a break? Of course not. I'm not saying that whatsoever. He needs to make the right decisions, because guess what? He had 2 points in game one, as I mentioned, but he was out there for 2 goals as well, I believe. So those kind of cancel each other out. It's very interesting you bring that up. And I think the decisions are going to have to be made for him to be more offensive, but also make the right decisions and sometimes make the simple play. But I think what happens with him sometimes is he realizes nobody around me is scoring. Nobody around me is making these. So he feels like he has to take it upon himself. And that's where he gets himself in trouble. But right now, the Washington Capitals, they remind me of a team that when you look at the playoffs, like if you look at the roster, if I read to you Connor McMichael, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Tom Wilson as a second line, I know McMichael had a good year. We know Tom Wilson had the best year of his career, one of the best year. But let's be honest, that's not scaring many people compared to a lot of the other second lines in the NHL playoffs right now. Third line, Mangiapane, Lars Eller, and Ryan Leonard, who just entered the league, 3-4 weeks ago? So this team is just built with a lot of kind of well-built guys that are physical, that are strong, that play the right way. And so that's why I keep reiterating that although the score was what it was, it still felt like it was a lot more. But I'm going to try and twist things. Everybody says a series doesn't start until you lose at home. And the last change is an aspect of hockey that a lot of casual fans aren't always aware of. And it is the most important in the playoffs. When you get that last change going back to Montreal, this time they're going to get the matchups of their choosing. And Martin St. Louis will get to decide who he wants to put out against who. And I think for the players like Lane Hudson, the young player, like you mentioned, for a guy like Demidov to get out there against maybe a fourth line instead of a second or first line will be really advantageous.
Absolutely. And I do think, for what it's worth, that you talked about needing a spark, Montreal needing a spark. I absolutely think anyone in hockey knows that the crowd at Bell Center is going to give them that spark for sure. Um, Want to talk about, you already mentioned Sam Montembeault earlier, but want to talk about the goaltending in this game, in particular on both sides, because it really was exceptional on both sides. Like I said, Canadians came roaring back in the third period, and Logan Thompson just suddenly became superhuman and made these unreal saves. And but before then, I think not even just in this game, but in game one as well, Sam Montembeault, regardless of how this series ends, at the end of it all, how much credit does Sam Montembeault get for not only keeping them in this series? Because, like you said, neither of these games have been blowouts, on the score sheet. How much credit does he get for keeping them competitive in this series? And honestly, I think we can go back to, how much credit does he deserve for getting them into the playoffs in the first place?
I think down the end of the stretch, I remember hearing media members and fans saying that they thought Jakob Dobish should be getting more starts because Montembeault looked tired. Montembeault was fatigued. There's too many starts for him down the stretch. And what we saw for the first time since Montembeault has been the starter and number one guy on the Montreal Canadiens, the coach said, "This is your net. You're going to keep it until it's not yours anymore, until someone takes it from you, until it's a back-to-back third game in 4 nights that you're just so gassed. We have to put in Dobish." And that's what we saw. I don't have the exact numbers right next to me, but all I know is, if there were 12 games at the last 12 games of the season, I bet you Montembeault played 10 of them. And that was something that he wasn't used to for a while. He deserves a ton of credit. But you know what I describe a goalie and getting credit is very similar to a coach, because when Martin St. Louis was quote unquote by some people on the hot seat in November, December, January, and he turned the team around and they bought into him, and every player says how much they love Martin St. Louis' belief. Well, you check the media reports and the newspapers. Nick Suzuki is carrying the team on his back. Cole Caulfield is doing what he's doing. Lane Hudson is taking this team to the next level. And I don't see any newspapers saying Martin St. Louis wills the team to the playoffs, right? But I think goaltenders and coaches are very similar in the aspect of, when the team's not doing well, it's their fault. When the team's doing well, they're just doing their job.
Oh, trust me, I cover the Nashville Predators, and I've been fighting that battle all season. I've been a huge UC Saros apologist for exactly that reason, but we don't need to get into that right now.
I was defending him
Again,
the other day, actually, because he got, was he
good.
not top 4, right? In I think the player ranking, I think he was
Yep.
top 4. And then somebody was saying to me, like, "Are you kidding me? Who's voting for Saros?" I'm like, a lot of this has to do with the team that you play on. And people will not understand that. It's the same thing for if an NBA player drops 35 points on the worst team in the league. I want to see what they can do against the best team in the league, or when they play
Right.
on the best team in the league. I like Saros a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I do too. I think, looking at, if, he had one of the worst seasons of his career, fair, but look at the defense playing in front of him, and then it'll make perfect sense. Now, we don't need to talk about Nashville
We
anymore.
could, but we won't.
We could, but we won't. We are here, of course, talking about the Washington Capitals defeating the Montreal Canadiens 3-1, game 2 of their playoff series. Washington leads the series, of course, 2-0. Again, we welcome all of your comments and questions wherever you're watching us from. Please send them to us, and we will be happy to answer them. And if you're a Habs fan, Andrew will be happy to commiserate with you. Doing a pause quickly and note that puck has dropped between the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche for game 3 of that series, and Colorado has scored. Val Nichushkin with the goal, so we've got 1-0 lead in the first period in Colorado there. And then, of course, we've got Edmonton and LA later tonight. Want to wrap up really quickly our discussion about the Habs and the Capitals, though, Andrew. And we've spent a lot of time talking about Montreal, but I
Mm.
do think that looking at Washington as a whole, as this team, they're so intriguing to me. I mean, if you look at, we talked about Logan Thompson earlier and how much he and Lindgren have really just solidified their situation in goal, which was huge. Thompson was one of the many offseason additions that the Capitals did make this past offseason to sort of retool around Ovechkin, because as long as you have Ovechkin, you can't rebuild, right? You can't just kickstart a rebuild. It's the same thing that the Pittsburgh Penguins are dealing with Sidney Crosby right now. So as long as you have Ovechkin, you can't fully scrap and rebuild. So they're trying to retool on the fly. A lot of people have mixed feelings about that. But Washington goes out and gets Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mangiapane, Jacob Chikrin, Matt Roy, Brandon Duhaime, Taylor Radish, all of these guys that, again, to your earlier point, none of those names really jump out at me. None of them really scare me and say like, oh, that's the needle mover. But I mean, it kind of looks like Washington is, at least right now, proof positive that the whole retool on the fly strategy can work and it can be successful. And I don't know how much of it is luck or how much of it is, just really calculated strategy, because a lot of these guys, I think we could argue, are probably what we could consider depreciated assets, like a lot of the guys that they added, but they hit them at the right time. They are all hitting at the same time. I mean, how much of that is like pure luck and how much of it do you think is just calculated move making by the Capitals?
Look, if I take my fan hat off for a second, this team is very deep, very, very deep. And they're not the fanciest of teams, not the flashiest of teams by any means, but they're certainly built for the playoffs. And I have to give credit to management because you brought up the Pittsburgh Penguins, and being from Eastern Canada, I'm 20 minutes from where Sidney Crosby was born. I'm also a kind of a Penguins guy, I got to say. And the way that these two teams, the trajectories they've gone on, kind of in the latter parts of the careers of both Crosby and Ovechkin, it breaks my heart because, yeah, Crosby got 3 cups, and that's probably the only reason why he's not leaving. He should. The way that the past two general managers have managed that team, it's been nothing like what the Capitals have been able to do. And there was a feature on the Canadian broadcast talking about Dylan Strome this evening for that reason. About, you mentioned it, it's not luck. I mean, it's perfect scouting. It's trades at the right time. It's picking up a player when nobody else really wanted him. Strome said in an interview, people were calling me a bust. People said that, hey, I'm not who they thought I was going to be, going in the top 3 in the draft. And I think Beauvillier is a great guy that stepped up as well in Protas's injury time right now. And again, even that fourth line, let's be honest, Radish, Dowd, and Duhaime, nobody wants to mess with those guys. But the biggest thing, John Carlson and Jacob Chikrin. I'm sure Ottawa Senators fans would have loved to have seen this version of Jacob Chikrin, but these two guys together running the point, the way that they play, and I think the head coaching staff and the full coaching staff has done a great job for the Capitals of running all 4 lines. They know when to put out Ovi, they know when to put out Strome, but at the end of the day, this team is certainly built for the playoffs. So sometimes it's not the team that kind of just flashes off the page to you. It's the team that has all the right pieces of the puzzle. And as just an overall sports fan, when you look at things, this is not like the NBA where you have a big 3. 3 players can't win you a Stanley Cup. You need that third liner. You need that fourth liner. You need all the missing pieces, all the right tools to get the job done.
All right. Well, do want to again mention that we've got Dallas and Colorado going on right now. Still 1-0 Colorado. Val Nichushkin with the goal. About 3 minutes left in the first period. So for those of you itching to go and watch that game and see Gabriel Landeskog play his first NHL game in almost 3 years, we will certainly let you get to that. Once again, I'm Emma Lingen. Andrew McGinnis, got one more question for you here really quickly before we wrap up. Looking at the Canadians, who in your mind, if you have to pick one guy, who needs a bounce back the most for this team in game 3? Who needs to show up?
I'm not going to say who you think I'm going to say. I'm going
Yeah,
to
you can't
say
say Patrick Laine. He's off limits.
I'm going to say Alex Newhook. I
Okay.
think that he's on the second line. They're not moving him down to the third line. It's not as much of a bounce back because he played okay, but that second line as a whole, whoever lands on that second line has to step up. It'll take a ton of pressure off Suzuki, Slavkovsky, and Caulfield. Second line overall, but especially Alex Newhook.
All right. Well, we'll see if it happens. Again, Dallas, Colorado, we'll let you get to it right now. Edmonton and LA in about 30 minutes now. So we've got lots more hockey to watch tonight. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Thank you to those who submitted their questions, comments, hopes, dreams, fears about this Capitals Canadian series. Do appreciate you tuning in and listening to us talk some hockey. Thank you again, Andrew, for joining me tonight. Once again, I'm Emma Lingen. He's Andrew McInnes. This is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, and we are live every night. So we will be back here tomorrow. We'll see you then.